So here we are again, back with my Lotus Esprit S2, and the last time I was sat here I was feeling a little bit grumpy as things weren't going quite how I'd expected, but there's nothing like the hair of the dog that bit you, and I'm back now after having done a couple of little jobs that have got me back in the mood for tackling it. So again, I'm at the front of the car still trying to get this front spoiler off, but I'm also looking at inside this front boot or fruit or frunk or whatever you want to call it, and tidying that up. So let's have a quick look at what I've been up to in there. So looking in the front compartment here then, you can see that I've removed the spare wheel that was occupying this space, being careful to preserve the paper tag that I keep going on about in some of my videos. The spare wheel's quite interesting because the car has different size wheels front and rear. This wheel is more like a space saver type wheel, and it's narrower and has a smaller diameter than the wheels actually fitted to the car most of the time. But the design of it's actually quite interesting. It's kind of a black and silver pattern there, which is quite cool. And actually, the more I think about the wheels, the more I quite like the idea of black and silver wheels, similar to what the previous owner's done to these ones, but I'll have to have a think about that and see if I can make them look a bit more professional. Anyway, further stuff in this front boot area were a couple of bolts which I've taken out. So one over here and one just there, and they seem to be attached to the radiator and the fan assembly, which is also mounted to the under tray of the front spoiler, which is also something I mentioned last time. So I've got a bit more play in that unit now, and I think there's only a couple of bolts left to undo to get that front under tray off, and then hopefully it will just be a couple of bolts to get the front spoiler off, and then that'll be that done. Remember, the objective is to try and free off this wiring loom, and once I've got that wiring loom out, that'll then allow me to start taking things off like this bonnet, which will then allow me to get to the lamp pods and slowly strip this car back from the front here backwards. One curious thing is this kind of cowling here, and I think this is the back of the heater, and what it's supposed to have on it, I think, are screws all the way around, and it looks like there are screw holes here, but mine is missing all of the screws, so I don't know if this is actually how it's supposed to be. I doubt it, but because there are screw holes here already, but it seems to be glued to this bulkhead, which is kind of a bit odd. I don't know why they've done that, but I'm going to try and take that off without breaking it, because I'm not sure if this panel is available anymore. Like a lot of things on this car, it seems to be these more bespoke plastic items that are thin on the ground, but yeah, we'll see if we can get this off and also take the heater out, and that'll be some good progress, I think. Right, so I started off by tackling this heater cowling here, and you can see I'm using a wallpaper scraper to try and separate the glue from the plastic trim there, and it seemed to be some sort of sealant that was being used, so maybe that was used to just keep out any air gaps around that particular housing or water, and it seemed to work quite well just using this wallpaper scraper. A little bit of damage to the paint, but it's going to be resprayed anyway, so no big deal. So once the cowling was off, it was possible then to see the fixings holding in both the heater matrix inside the car and to some extent what was holding the heater motor cover, which is that green object you see there. However, the actual room to work in this part of the car is very tight, so I ended up having to remove the gutter from just underneath the windscreen to try and get a bit more access to the fixings. Once I've managed to get the fixings off that were holding in the heater matrix, it was time then to try and remove some of the hoses that were keeping it in place still. Now, I optimistically tried some WD-40 and a screwdriver, then subsequently broke my electric screwdriver on these Jubilee clips. I had to be practical and just used a hacksaw to get through the hoses. This just seemed to be the easiest thing to do, as I was going to renew these hoses anyway. So once the hoses had been cut through, it was just a matter of making sure all the ducting had been taken off of where it was attached to the dashboard, and I'd already previously disconnected the heater control cable from the dashboard as well, so just needed a bit of wrestling to get it out from underneath there. It took a bit of effort, as you can see from my expression, but it was quite rewarding seeing that come out of the car. So that was the inside, and then on the outside we've got these heater motors that needed to be removed, and this was more like an IQ test, this one. So underneath some sealant there was some self-tapping screws that needed to be undone, so I just used a combination of my pliers and a screwdriver there, and then just got the covers off. And then with those covers removed, there were a few more bolts to unscrew that were fixed to the bulkhead, but these were just really rusty, and I had to resort to using a Dremel to get those off. I did cause some minor damage to the green housing when using the Dremel, but I think it'll be fine if I just use some slightly bigger washers when reattaching it to the car. I'm not sure why I'm holding pliers here, but the motor housing just lifted out after that. So after the triumph of getting out the heater motors and the heater matrix, I turned my attention back to the front spoiler. I was using a Dremel to get medieval on a couple of bolts, which seemed to be the best way to try and tackle this. The Dremel actually was quite a good tool for this work. The angle grinder was too big and cumbersome for this area, and even though I used a couple of cutting discs, the Dremel seemed to work okay. So as I was struggling with the front spoiler still, trying to figure out how it was attached and aggressively jiggling it, before I broke something I thought I'd try and remove the bonnet, as that looked quite simple. Only one nut sheared off, and it was actually quite a rewarding task to do, because seeing that bonnet come off looks like quite good progress. And even though it was quite tricky as just one person removing a bonnet, because it's fiberglass, it was quite easy to manoeuvre once it was disconnected from the car. So I forgot to film the last bolt coming off, but I managed to finally remove the front spoiler, and the grille that was in the opening of the front spoiler I think might need to be replaced. It's slightly rusty. So that left the under tray with the radiator and fan assembly attached to it, and this was connected now just by a couple of hoses, and I just used my hacksaw again, as I was going to be renewing those anyway. And I noticed as I got the fan housing or the under tray out that there was some damage to the front of the car in one corner, and this was consistent with the front spoiler as well, where some fiberglass repair had happened too. So with the under tray removed, you can see the chassis, and also a very gunky pipe coming to the radiator, which looks like some head gasket type failure there, but time will tell. But that did allow me access to remove the bolt that was holding in those earth wires. If you remember from last time, was the whole start of this exterior strip, so we finally got there. So there we go then, a bit more progress with the Esprit, and getting past this front spoiler bit, which I was struggling with last time, is a really rewarding result there. Having seen the condition of the chassis behind the front spoiler, it's no real surprise it's in bad shape. I knew it would be anyway, and the more concerning thing for me was the presence of all that gunk in the radiator hoses there, indicating perhaps head gasket failure or whatever. But you know, this has had a chance to marinate for a good 3 decades, so again, that might just be a false alarm there, and we'll have to see once the engine gets rebuilt. Anyway, next step is to carry on taking that wiring loom out and do the headlamp pods next, so that'll be kind of the next update whenever I can do that. So until the next time, take care of yourselves and see you again very soon. Bye bye.